The footage began with laughter, bright and careless, the sound of people who believed they were about to collect stories instead of becoming one, the camera bobbing as the tour boat pushed off from a muddy riverbank deep inside Costa Rica's Osa Peninsula, where the jungle leaned so close to the water it cast the river into permanent twilight even at noon. What investigators would later fixate on was not what the lens captured at first: scarlet macaws streaking overhead, mist curling between strangler fig roots, sunlight spearing through leaves, but the audio track underneath it, a faint rhythmic tapping that persisted for the entire recording, too slow to be engine knock, too consistent to be coincidence, like something pacing the boat from beneath the surface. 8 tourists and 2 local guides had signed up for what was advertised as a routine wildlife excursion, drifting through remote tributaries inaccessible by road, the kind of experience marketed with promises of untouched ecosystems and encounters with animals most people only saw in documentaries. Satellite pings placed the vessel exactly where it should have been for the first 40 minutes, following a serpentine stretch of river so narrow the foliage brushed passengers' shoulders. Water dark as brewed tea, thick with submerged roots that occasionally nudged the hull with hollow, underwater thumps. One guide joked about crocodiles, then quickly added that none had ever come this far upstream, his smile tight enough to show he didn't quite believe himself. The tapping grew louder. On the recovered camera audio, it sounds like wood being struck gently with knuckles from below once every 3 seconds, a patient testing rhythm, while several passengers can be heard asking what it is, their voices light at first, turning uncertain when the guide avoids answering directly and instead scans the waterline with narrowed eyes, pointing out a troop of monkeys high in the canopy that none of the tourists remember seeing in person. In later interviews, those conducted with other operators in the region, people described similar rivers where the wildlife simply stopped making noise for minutes at a time, places the locals avoided after dusk, though none admitted to believing in anything supernatural, only in currents that changed too fast, sinkholes that swallowed boats whole, and stretches of water where sound behaved strangely. The video shows the moment the forest goes quiet. 1 second, the soundtrack is layered with insects, birds, distant howler monkeys. The next, it collapses into that steady tapping and the soft churn of the engine, the sudden absence so stark that one woman laughs nervously and says it feels like the jungle turned its volume knob down. The camera pans left, then right, catching walls of vegetation that feel closer than before, leaves trembling though no wind touches the water. Shadows pooling under overhangs of root systems, so dense they resemble braided cages. Then, the river widens. According to maps, it shouldn't. The channel opens into a slow-moving basin surrounded by sheer moss-coated embankments that rise like amphitheater walls, sunlight barely touching the surface. The water reflecting the green-black above it so perfectly, the horizon line disappears, giving the impression the boat is floating inside a hollow sphere. The tapping stops. The sudden silence is worse. One of the guides cuts the engine, muttering something the microphone barely picks up, a local phrase that later translators rendered as, "this place again," his hand drifting toward the machete at his belt, while the other passengers lean forward, confused, trying to spot whatever he's staring at along the cliff-like banks. The camera zooms. Something moves beneath the surface, not fast, not like a fish or a crocodile, a slow displacement, a bulge traveling just under the water skin, long enough that it passes from one edge of frame to the other without breaking the surface, ripples spreading outward in perfect concentric rings as though calculated. Someone whispers, asking if it's a submerged log. Another voice answers too quickly that yes, of course it is. The guide doesn't say anything. The boat drifts. The recording jitters as the person holding the camera stands, trying to get a better angle, and that's when the second disturbance appears, closer this time, followed by a third, multiple parallel wakes sliding around the hull, circling, the water darkening in places where something wide passes beneath, blotting out reflected light like clouds crossing the sun. On shore, something clicks. Not an insect sound. A hollow wooden knock from inside the embankment itself, echoed by another further downriver, then another, until the basin answers with a scattered chorus, the noise bouncing off stone and foliage in a way that makes it impossible to tell how many sources there are or where any of them actually sit. One tourist swears on the tape that it sounds like sonar. The engine refuses to restart. The starter whines, then dies. Hands grip the gunnel. The camera captures a dark opening at the waterline on the right bank, an oval void beneath a curtain of roots where the river seems to flow inward instead of past, subtle but wrong, like a drain disguised as part of the shoreline. The surface around it spins slowly, lazily, a rotational pull just strong enough to tug floating leaves sideways. A guide shouts for everyone to sit down. Another tells them to stay absolutely still. The clicking grows louder, closer, from below the boat now. The hull shudders once, a deep resonant vibration that runs the length of the vessel, making water slosh and people cry out. The camera dipping toward the surface just in time to catch something pale sliding beneath. Too smooth for scales, too wide for a single body, its edges fraying into multiple tendrils that rejoin again seconds later like liquid anatomy. The basin answers with a low-frequency hum. It isn't audible so much as felt. On the recording, the microphone distorts, clipping into static while the tourists cover their ears, shouting that it hurts, that their teeth are buzzing, that they can't think straight, that the water looks thicker, darker, pulling harder. One man loses his balance and nearly falls overboard before being dragged back by his backpack straps, the camera tumbling sideways and capturing the cliff walls as they appear to lean inward. Reflections warping, the river surface stretching like a lens. There is a splash. Someone screams. The camera swings back just in time to show the boat dipping sharply, water pouring over the front as though something massive has surfaced beneath it. Lifting and dragging simultaneously, the guides hacking at the water with machetes that strike nothing visible, yet send vibrations through the hull like blows against rubber. A pale shape breaches for less than a second, a curved arc studded with darker nodules, neither fin nor limb, before vanishing again, leaving a whirlpool where it broke the surface, the drain on the shoreline expanding, sucking foam and debris toward its center. The last 30 seconds of footage are chaos, shouting in Spanish and English layered over the grinding scream of stressed wood, the camera skittering across the deck, catching shoes sliding toward the water, a hand grabbing for the lens, faces warped with terror as the river accelerates around them, the basin turning into a slow, colossal spiral. Then the feed cuts to black. 3 days later, search teams found the boat wedged sideways against a sandbar 20 kilometers downstream, empty, hull scarred with long, shallow gouges that didn't match rocks or propellers, engine intact, fuel tank half full. No bodies surfaced, no blood, no backpacks, no life jackets, only the camera. It was lodged in a tangle of roots on the shore, still sealed in its waterproof housing, memory card miraculously intact. Officials blamed a flash flood and possible wildlife attack, though rainfall records showed nothing unusual that week, and no known species in the region could account for the suction patterns modeled from debris distribution. Local operators quietly stopped using that tributary, referring to it only as the slow water when asked why.
If you find the story interesting, please do well to subscribe to my channel Nightling, like and comment.
The emergency call reached the sheriff's office just after 3:11 a.m., but the dispatcher would later swear the line had been open long before anyone spoke, filled with a dry, whispering wind and a low electrical hum that sounded less like interference and more like something breathing too close to the microphone. When the voice finally cut through, it belonged to a middle-aged man from Oregon leading a caravan of retirees across the Southwest. And the first thing he said, before giving his name, before stating his location, was that the motel outside Beatty wasn't on any map anymore, that the building was still standing around them, glowing in their headlights. But every GPS unit in the convoy insisted they were parked in open desert. Then he added, very quietly, that some of the rooms had doors on the inside that led somewhere else. The group had been driving toward Death Valley after a late dinner in Las Vegas, stretching the route longer than planned, the road thinning into a ribbon of cracked asphalt surrounded by miles of black nothing, when an old neon sign blinked to life ahead of them, half buried in sand, spelling out Sunset Pines in letters that flickered like dying stars. No trees stood anywhere near it. No building showed on any navigation app. But the gas gauges were dropping fast, and when the convoy leader pulled into the lot, the others followed, headlights illuminating a single-story row of rooms shaped in a shallow horseshoe around an empty swimming pool filled with drifting tumbleweeds and pale, unmoving water that reflected the moon like glass. Several people remembered how cold it felt stepping out of their vehicles. Not nighttime desert chill, but something deeper. A dry, aching cold that crept through jackets and made teeth chatter within seconds. The air so still it felt sealed in plastic. Inside the office, the bell rang when someone tapped it, though no one stood behind the counter. And a guest book lay open to a page already filled with names written in different inks. Some dated decades apart, others marked only with times instead of days. The most recent entry scrawled less than an hour earlier in shaky cursive that ended mid-signature. They should have left then. Most of them said later that they felt it. An instinctive pressure in the chest, the kind that makes you back away from cliffs without knowing why, but exhaustion and empty fuel tanks kept them rooted while the leader walked the corridor knocking on doors, finding each one unlocked and identical inside, old televisions humming with static, beds neatly made, bathroom mirrors slightly fogged as though someone had just showered and stepped out of view. It was room 12 that broke the pattern. One woman pushed the door open and froze, staring into a second hallway where the bathroom should have been, long and narrow and lined with doors on both sides, the carpet stained darker the farther it stretched, ceiling lights flickering in slow, rhythmic pulses that made the space feel longer every time they blinked. A couple of people stepped closer, peering past her shoulder, noticing the hallway bent subtly left, then right, then vanished into shadow, far deeper than the motel's exterior dimensions could possibly allow. Someone laughed. Not because it was funny, but because nobody knew what else to do. They didn't explore for long. Just a few hesitant steps inside, enough to hear faint sounds drifting down the corridor, a television jingle, running water, a child humming out of tune, before the group leader ordered everyone back out, skin prickling, eyes refusing to look away from the darkness pooling at the end of the hall. That was when the doors started closing. Not slamming, not violently, just clicking shut, one after another along the outer corridor, metal latches sliding into place with polite, careful finality, sealing rooms that had been opened seconds before. Wind rushed through the courtyard, whipping sand into spirals, and the neon sign outside surged brighter, buzzing loud enough to make fillings ache, the pool water trembling with concentric ripples that had no visible source. 2 people were missing, a husband and wife who'd lagged behind unloading suitcases, their car door still open, keys on the seat, no footprints leading away from the vehicle except toward the motel, and then stopping dead halfway across the concrete like someone had simply lifted them straight up. Phones showed no signal. Satellite radios crackled with static. When the caravan leader tried to restart his engine, it coughed once and died, dashboard lights flickering in patterns nobody recognized, as though responding to some internal logic instead of electrical faults. The dispatcher later said the man's voice over the emergency line kept breaking up while he described corridors inside corridors, doors opening to reveal stairwells that spiraled downward into humming darkness, rooms that rearranged themselves when you looked away, televisions switching from snow to grainy black and white footage of empty desert highways filmed from angles too low to be drone shots, as though the camera was crawling inches above the asphalt. One woman insisted she'd heard her name whispered from inside room 7 in her sister's voice. Her sister had been standing beside her at the time. By the time sheriff's deputies reached the coordinates, following the half-finished emergency transmission, the lot was empty. No neon sign, no building, no tire tracks, only a wide, circular depression in the sand where vehicles had recently been parked and a faint chemical smell in the air, like overheated wiring. The missing couple was never found. Neither was the motel. Locals claimed there had once been a roadside stop out there in the 70s that burned down under unclear circumstances, its foundation bulldozed and covered by drifting dunes within a few years, but nobody could explain the fresh concrete chips recovered from the scene or the motel key discovered half buried nearby stamped with the number 12.
The first warning came not from a scream or a crash, but from silence. The kind of silence that crawls into your ears and presses inward until your own breathing feels criminally loud. The kind of silence a forest only makes when everything alive inside it has decided to stop moving at the same time. It was just past midnight when the tour bus rolled off the paved highway in Chiapas and onto the narrow jungle service road. The driver muttering that a landslide had blocked the main route, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while 42 passengers stared through fogged windows at trees that leaned inward like ribs closing around a lung. Several of them would later tell authorities that the air itself changed the moment the tires hit dirt, that the humidity thickened until it felt chewable, and that the insects, previously deafening, vanished so abruptly it felt rehearsed. By dawn, the bus would be empty. The engine would still be warm. The group had been traveling between Palenque and a coastal resort. Most of them foreign backpackers stitched together by the same budget tour company. A few local guides riding along for extra money, and one university professor from Arizona documenting ancient trade routes through the jungle. His voice recorder constantly running, its red light blinking like a nervous eye in his pocket. According to his recovered audio files, the road began to narrow after 20 minutes, vines clawing at the sides of the bus, branches scraping along the roof with long metallic shrieks that made people flinch, while the driver kept assuring them it was normal, that trucks used the path all the time, though the vegetation suggested nothing wide had passed through in months. The headlights illuminated walls of green, so dense the darkness behind them felt intentional, like the forest was hiding something just outside the cone of light, something pacing them, something waiting for the right curve in the road. A woman in the back row, later identified through a passport found under a seat, laughed nervously and asked whether this was really the right way, and when the driver didn't answer immediately, the professor recorded the sound of his own heartbeat accelerating. A dull, rhythmic thud picked up by the mic whenever the bus lurched over potholes that grew deeper with every mile. One of the local guides finally spoke, his Spanish low and careful, saying the road wasn't marked on any modern map, that it might have once been used by logging crews decades ago. But his words dissolved when the bus crested a small hill and the engine sputtered, coughed, then dropped into a shuddering idle that vibrated through the seats and into bone. They rolled to a stop beside a wall of jungle so thick it felt architectural, leaves layered over leaves, vines braided together like rope, tree trunks rising so close to the road they scraped paint from the bus's sides. No birds, no insects, just the tick of cooling metal and the soft mechanical whine of the headlights. The driver popped the hood and stepped out, flashlight beams slicing into the foliage while the passengers leaned forward in their seats, watching the white cone of light wobble as he cursed softly, then go still, then drift sideways, slow and deliberate, as though something else had taken hold of his wrist. Someone called his name. No answer. The beam vanished. On the recording, you can hear the first person stand up, the rustle of clothing, the soft crunch of gravel as one of the guides climbed down after him. Calling again, louder this time, the word swallowed almost immediately by the jungle's thickness, his voice sounding wrong in that place, flattened, like it couldn't travel properly through the air. 30 seconds later, the second flashlight dropped to the ground, still lit, pointing into the undergrowth. Panic doesn't explode all at once. It leaks. Whispers moved seat to seat. Phones came out, screens glowing pale blue. Against terrified faces, camera lenses pointed through windows that reflected their own expressions back at them instead of whatever waited beyond the glass. The professor's recorder picked up a woman praying under her breath. Another man insisting it had to be an animal, maybe a jaguar, maybe wild dogs, while someone else noticed that the leaves near the fallen flashlights were moving, not shaking like something passing through, but slowly parting, bending outward as though brushed by something tall and careful that didn't want to be seen. The engine suddenly died completely. The lights flickered once, twice, then went dark. In that instant, the jungle rushed back to life, not with normal sound, but with something layered beneath it, low tonal vibrations that crawled through the floorboards, through the seat frames, into rib cages like the entire forest had exhaled at once. Several passengers screamed. Someone hammered on the driver's door. Another tried the emergency exit at the back, finding it jammed. What followed exists only in fragments. Phone videos corrupted by static, audio clips full of distortion, scattered witness account from two people who would later stagger into a rural police station nearly 30 miles away, barefoot, bleeding, unable to explain how they'd escaped. They say the shapes came from above first. Long silhouettes unfolding from the canopy without sound, dropping onto the roof with weight that dented metal inward, claws or hands. Neither description ever stayed consistent, sliding across the bus in slow, exploratory drags that made passengers curl into themselves as the ceiling bowed centimeters above their heads. Windows fogged instantly, not from breath but from cold, sudden and sharp, as if something had sucked the heat from the air, and when one of the overhead panels cracked, fingers, too many jointed, bending backward in places they shouldn't, pushed through, testing the plastic before ripping it down entirely. Screams layered over screams. Someone kicked a window hard enough to shatter it. Glass spraying into the aisle, jungle air pouring inside thick with rot, and something metallic that coated tongues and throats, while shadows slid across the opening, blocking moonlight that shouldn't have existed under such dense canopy at all. The professor kept narrating, voice shaking, describing movement in every direction, something climbing underneath the chassis, something else breathing from the trees, a wet, deliberate inhale followed by a clicking sound that echoed back wrong, like the forest itself was imitating it a half second too late. One of the survivors claimed he saw the driver again, standing 20 feet from the bus, backlit by phone flashlights, body rigid, head tilted too far backward, mouth opening and closing without sound while something tall loomed behind him, its outline folding and unfolding like smoke trying to pretend it had bones. When authorities finally found the vehicle 2 days later, it was sitting exactly where the GPS coordinates last placed it, surrounded by jungle that showed no sign of struggle. No broken branches, no blood, no drag marks, nothing but tire tracks that ended abruptly in the middle of the road, as though the bus had been gently lowered from the sky. Inside, every seatbelt was unbuckled. Every bag remained. Every phone lay, smashed except one, lodged under a seat. Its final video a blurred mess of darkness, distorted screaming, and a towering silhouette that leaned in a frame just before the clip ended. Investigators never released that footage to the public. They claimed it was too degraded to be useful. The two survivors couldn't explain how they'd gotten out, only that they remembered running, tripping, hearing things follow them through foliage that didn't move, shapes pacing them from both sides of the trail, always close enough to hear, never close enough to see, until sunlight appeared like a hallucination and the jungle simply let them go. To this day, local drivers refuse to use that stretch of land. Satellite imagery reportedly shows nothing unusual, and the bus company quietly dissolved within 6 months, its records disappearing into legal fog. If you find the story interesting, please do well to subscribe to my channel Nightling, like and comment.